I'm Stephen Blackwood, and I have the great honor today to be here with Sir Roger Penrose and Dr. Jordan-Peterson. Let's get right down to it. Jordan, I know you have questions you're keen to pose to Sir Roger. Over to you.
Yeah, well, I've wanted to talk to a theoretical physicist for about 30 years, and so I'm pretty happy that you're the theoretical physicist that I get to talk to.
I'm probably not representative, so you...
Well, that might be even better. So I want to jump right into it. A colleague and friend of mine is a AI engineer and a computer engineer, and he's built a lot of the world's great chips, iPhone chip, and first 64-bit chip, the Alpha, back in 1985. And we were having a conversation. I said I was coming to meet you, and that you, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, believe me, but that you believe that consciousness is in some fundamental sense non-computational. And I asked him what he thought about that. And part of the reason I asked him is because he's, of all the people I've ever met, and maybe of all the people in the world, he's the person who's done most to build arguably brain-like algorithmic systems. And so I asked him if he thought that there was a distinction between the algorithmic computation of cognition per se and whatever consciousness might be. And he thought it was algorithmic all the way down. And I understand that you don't believe that. I also went with him a couple of times to a consciousness conference in Tucson where Hameroff spoke.
Sure.
So we got familiar with that line of reasoning. And I also understand, I believe, that part of the reason that you think that consciousness is necessarily non-computational is because of Gödel's theorem. And so maybe we could enter there. So I'm very curious about your proposition that consciousness per se is non-computational, and I'm curious about why you came to that conclusion, and if you think that's a warranted conclusion, what you think about that in relationship to these complex AI systems, and also in relationship to Gödel's theorem.
Well, I've never seen the argument refuted. I've just talked to people who've never really understood it, as far as I know. No, the argument goes back to when I was a graduate student, and I was doing pure mathematics, algebraic geometry, and I went to 3 courses, which were nothing to do with what I was supposed to be doing. One of them was a wonderful course by Hermann Bondi on general relativity, which had a big influence on what I did later on. One was a talk by the great physicist Paul Dirac, and that taught me about quantum mechanics. And the third one was a course by a logician called Steen, and he taught me about Turing machines, the notion of computability, what it is and how you understand that, and the Gödel theorem. And I had heard vaguely about the Gödel theorem previously and had been rather worried because it seemed to show that there were things in mathematics that you couldn't prove. What I learned was that it's not like that at all. Well, it is like that in a sense. If you lay down the rules of what you call a proof, and if those rules are such that they could be checked by a computer, checked whether they've been correctly applied by a computer, so computation rules in that sense, then you can construct a sentence. This is what Gödel did, which, by the way it's constructed, you can see that if you trust the rules, that is to say, if you believe that the rules do, if they say, yes, you've proved it, tick, then you believe it's correct. That is to say, if you have trust in the rules, that trust extends beyond the rules. In other words, you can see that a certain statement is true by virtue of your belief that the rules only give you truths. Yet, that statement is underivable, unprovable using the rules.
That statement of faith about the rules.
It's not a statement of faith. I'm sorry, I didn't understand
that.
The faith is, it's not a faith. You understand the rules, you check them, you say, yes, that's okay. If that rule is correctly applied, I agree, it does, it's a rule which is within something that you believe to be appropriate. Yeah. And these rules, it's built up out of things like this, which nobody would dispute. You say, okay, if you follow those rules, and it says, yes, that's a proof, then you believe that the thing that it says, yes, it's a proof, is actually a true statement. So does a proof really mean that it's true? If you believe that that conviction that the proofs actually do what they're supposed to do gives you something beyond the rules themselves.
Okay, that's what I was referring to with this,
Yes.
with the word faith, is that the statement of belief. Well, I shouldn't maybe
I
use
think,
that
wrong
word.
word.
Well,
Yes.
I guess I'm
Okay,
wondering
yes.
what do you think it is that
Understanding.
constitutes that belief? Okay, and why the word understanding specifically? Because that's the thing in some sense that's outside the system. The understanding?
Yes, it is, because you can see it is, because it's the understanding that the rules give you only truths that enables you to understand that this Gödel statement is actually true.
And so is that belief in that truth of that proof, that is one of the things that Gödel pointed out would be necessarily outside any system that's both, formal, logical, and coherent?
It shows that I read it in this particular way. I don't think he said it quite like this, but I read it in the following way, that understanding, whatever that word means, is not computational.
Okay.
It's
So
not,
that is what
it's not the following of rules. It's something else.
Okay, so let me ask you a question about that. So this is a three-pronged question, let's say.
Okay, yes.
It seems to me that there's a high probability that the future is actually indeterminately different than the present and the past, that it's actually unpredictably different.
Oh, this is a different question.
Yeah,
now you're talking about determinism.
Yes. But I think it seems to me that it's tied to this idea that computation can be complete and algorithmic. I don't think it can be, because if the future differs in a fundamental manner, an unpredictable manner from the present or the past, then a deterministic algorithmic system can't maintain a grip on the horizon of the future. And I have another part of that question.
But it's a different question. So I think it's important to distinguish these things.
Yes.
Because up to this point, I was not talking about indeterminism.
No.
I was talking about rules. Well, just yes or no. And I mean, it's not a question of maybe or. I mean, it isn't even talking about the laws of physics at this stage. That's the second step, if you like.
I guess I leapt forward to something like the potential necessary function of consciousness. So, because one of the things consciousness seems to do from a neurophysiological perspective, for example, we tend to become conscious of our procedural errors. And so consciousness becomes alerted to the errors and then zeroes in on the source of the error in some sense and corrects it. And so it looks to me like it's something like a correction system for underlying algorithmic systems. So, for example, if you practice a motor routine for a long time, you build specialized algorithmic machinery in your brain that runs it. But maybe you've put in an error. You're playing a difficult piano phrase, for example, and you stumble over a note. You've automatized that. You play it, and you listen, and you hear the anomaly, which is the error. Your consciousness focus isn't on that. A large brain area will activate as a consequence of becoming aware of that error. Then when you practice the new routine that's corrected, the brain area will shrink and shrink and shrink until it's a small part of the brain, usually in the back of the left hemisphere. And now you've built another automated machine to play out that phrase. And consciousness, I think it was Whitehead who said that at least the purpose of consciousness, although he might have used thought, was to increase the number of things that we can do without consciousness or thought. But it seems to be this horizon phenomena. And the reason I was asking about the indeterminacy of the future was twofold, is that if the future is deterministic, then an algorithmic system could in principle adapt to it. But it doesn't seem to me that the future can be predictable, and I think that might be grounded in something like quantum indeterminacy, because there isn't a fundamental determinism that propagates all the way up. So,
well, you see, I mean, we have to. The things I was talking about up to this point were not to do. They weren't even to do with the laws of physics, so that's a separate question. I mean, it did relate to that, which is my own views certainly did depend on that, but. The question of determinism is a separate issue. And the normal way we look at quantum mechanics is it does involve an indeterminism, which you can have a theory which does that too. But that's different, you see. If it's just indeterministic, it's not connected. But you see, the Gödel argument is to do with things where you have definite rules. You